Hello. Welcome. No, but it doesn't go. You started. I'll tell you when. Okay?
I'll tell you.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. Welcome. Technology slowed me down because the webcast, they gave me a signal when to begin. So machines are controlling our lives, or are we controlling machines? So my name is Rabbi Jacobson. I welcome you all. Those of you who've been here before, those who have not, so welcome again to another episode. And I especially welcome some of my good friends from the East Village. I don't know if you. I don't want to embarrass you in any way, but so I won't call you by name. Okay. As I've discussed many times in the class here, this class has been going on now for close to a quarter of a century. More than a quarter of a century. Don't depress me.
That's a testament.
Yeah. As we say, when we wore younger men's clothes, and some of you wore younger women's clothes, it actually began in a very interesting way, as I mentioned several times. Some of the greatest things in life happen when you don't plan them. As a matter of fact, some say that when we humans don't get in the way with our planning, the real things can emerge in life, real magic can happen. In Yiddish they say, Gott tracht, and a Mensch tracht and Gott lacht. A person thinks and God has his own plan. So it was around, I think in 1982 in the winter, a long time ago. There was no internet, no email, no fax machines. Computers were just coming on the scene. I was using a typewriter at the time. You all know what a typewriter is? Oh, really? Today it's antique. Right. And
luckily you don't have a young audience. They will ask you, you don't know what the internet is?
Yeah. You know, they were writing, I just saw an article about the Kindle from Amazon. People are saying that, it's terrible how technology is displacing natural reading. So someone wrote an article and said, technology is anything that was invented after you were born. Remember, a book was also once technology. They didn't have books. Before Gutenberg's press, we didn't publish books. It was written by scribes on parchment, which is like a Torah scroll, and so on. So anyway, back then, before many wars were fought in 1982, the winter, a mutual friend suggested to a fellow who was living in New York in the Upper West Side to come speak to me. He was looking for some spiritual inspiration, and he was you could say I guess a representative, if you can call it that, of a large cross-section of the American Jewry, which is people who understand, have a Jewish identity but don't know what it's about. Some who are actually confused, others who are actually turned off, some who are proud, some have mixed feelings, and I'm sure all of us here have something in between, over and under. And he was a fellow who was searching, and he found actually his spirituality in Buddhism. As I don't know if you know this, but 60% of Buddhists in America are Jewish. And the reason for that, obviously, Jews are seekers. So you don't find it in your own backyard, you search elsewhere. So he was one of those types, and he came to see me, and it was just a casual get-together. I remember it was a Thursday evening, cold night. I remember how he was dressed, that's how I knew it was cold. And we just hit it off in a conversation about life, about purpose, about Jewish, about everything. And the next week he brought a friend along, and the next week after that they brought another friend along, and literally a friend brought a friend, and they happened to be people from the music and entertainment industry, So it was a lot of musicians that I got to know those first few years. And it just became this casual, so-called informal discussion that we were having every Thursday night. Then it was Thursday night. The reason being because that was the night I was free. The earlier part of the week I was working. I was very intensely involved in writing. I was the scribe of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's words, so that was very intense work. But Thursday night, we had these amazing evenings that at the time you don't even know it was going to be something special. But it turns out, the most special things is when you don't, as I said, plan it. And what ended up happening was we were all not in our comfort zones. I grew up in a traditional home, and not that I was this uncomfortable, but most of the people coming were people who were very turned off of Judaism. They're not affiliated in any way, but they nevertheless are very much part of the population, of the Jewish population in America. There are 5-6 million Jews here, and Ken Yerbu, as we say, all over the world, 15-16 million Jews. Unfortunately, you can say that a good 85% are what we would call unaffiliated or are on the border. And this is not a judgment, it's just a statement. And if you turn the clock back 500 years ago, it was the other way around. It was 95, 98% Jews, even higher probably, that were all observant. So without going into analysis what happened, bottom line is, as one nation and one people, I was brought up that we are responsible for each other, like brothers and sisters. Not to judge each other, not to be condescending, but simply to share. So this is what happened. We had these, as I said, fascinating nights, debates. We argued about things. I shared the things I learned about Jewish spirituality. I remember one evening talking about the energy within everything that exists. And there was a woman there, and she says to me, "Did you ever take LSD?" So I said, "No." She said, "Because you sound like a person, no one can talk that way without acid." Because she said to me, "You really believe that the orange and the apple and the what was it, the peach have energy in it? Like, it's vibrating energy?" I said, "Yeah, I absolutely not only believe it, I can sense it in a way." And it's not that surprising if you know a little physics. We know that everything, and there's nothing inanimate in this universe. Everything is buzzing with pulsating subatomic particles that are always on the move. So, not surprising that the mystics taught this many, many years ago. And and I remember that, and she was one of the students in Berkeley in the late 50s. They were doing legally experiments, LSD. They were volunteers that were volunteering for some LSD program until it was made illegal in the 60s. So these were these interesting conversations, as I said, debates and arguments, and we really became very connected, myself with these individuals. Many still continued to come. Here, Jeff is a specimen. Jeff was a young man, maybe 17.
Was?
No, you were 17. That's the past, right? 16. Well, and basically, I will say that all of you sitting here right now are a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend that began that many years ago. So it's really gratifying to be able to sit here because you know how many things really last that long, and especially ones that have positive feelings. I have developed, I don't know how many relationships, excellent ones that have changed my life. And I thank you for this, and I thank all those that have been here over the years. This is not a goodbye speech. I'm just beginning. But I felt I should just say this as a bit of an introduction. And what I really learned from it, among many things, was firstly, great things happen when you get out of your comfort zone. When you talk to people that you grew up with, and you stay in your own so-called ghetto environment, you end up not ever having something really fresh and new. Great things happen, as God told Abraham, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, when he leaves his homeland. Abraham lived in the south of Iraq, modern day Iraq. It was then Mesopotamia. It was called Babylon, different names. And God says to him, maybe the first commandment in the Torah, which is really a commandment to all of us, that Lech lecha ma'artzecha, leave your homeland, Maladetecha, your place of birth, and Beis Avicha, the home of your parents, and go ela eretz asher areka, go to the land that I will show you. And it's interesting, it's actually strange, that God does not say to Abraham where he should go to. He just says, go to the land that I will show you, a very vague statement. When it comes to the point of departure, God does spell out, leave your artzacha, meladtecha, basically 3 different expressions which can even be redundant. Now we know when you give someone directions, it's not everyone knows where they're leaving from. You want to know where to arrive. You need a GPS to know where the destination, not the point of departure. You know where you are. How do you get where? So they tell you, listen, you're in New York, okay, travel west to Los Angeles. Here's the city, the street, the number, and that's that. Here, God reverses it. When it comes to the point of destination, it's very vague. The land I will show you. When it comes to the departure, God reiterates 3 times. The land, Artzacha, your land, the place of your birth, and the home of your parents. And one of the beautiful explanations for this is in a psychological one, is that these 3 expressions really refer to 3 stages, or actually 3 aspects of our own journey. So when a person asks the question, how do I get out of the place I'm stuck in? It's a question that all of us are going to have to face at some point in our life. Maybe you're facing it now. Here in Upper West Side, the mecca of single life, many people say, how do I get out of this mess? I keep dating and it doesn't go anywhere. Stuck. Some people feel psychologically stuck. Excuse me. Some people feel emotionally stuck. Physically, you're stuck in the past. You get in a rut, in a pattern, and it's very hard to get out of patterns. We all know that. Habits are very powerful. Even when you make that resolution, we always gravitate back often to our initial state. This is whether it's resolutions to lose weight, and you have the metabolism argument or whatever it is, but something always, it's hard to get out of your status quo, so to speak. 1 second. L'chaim, everyone. I just have to clear my throat. It's water. So, or is it? So the big question: how do you get out of a place? And we know from ourselves. Every one of us knows that there often you really strongly and sincerely want to get away from a certain situation, and you know that you have to make a move, and you actually begin the journey, and then something happens. Sometimes we don't even notice, and we're just back where we started, square one. And you say to yourself, what's the matter with me? Was it that you really didn't have the resolve? Were you fooling yourself? Do we not have control? Is it some type of like a predestined fatalism? What exactly is going on? So this commandment to Abraham is really the secret of all movement. Because Lech Lecha, remember, is movement. Go on to you, go. The secret of all movement is not the destination as it is the point of departure. Because you may know where you want to go, but if you have shackles that hold you back, so all your goodwill and all your intentions are not going to get you there. Think of it like this: you're stuck in a place and you're tied by with chains to a pole. So it's a long chain, and you really see ahead of you paradise where you want to go. So you set out on your way, and as you go, suddenly the leash pulls you right back. In other words, our pasts haunt our future. So even if you have great intentions and you really do want to make a move, as long as you have traps, things that trap you and keep you locked to where you were in the past, you will not be able to really get there. So God wisely says to Abraham, if you want to really reach the place to know yourself, you have to free yourself from your past, as difficult as it may be. And he uses these 3 expressions, Artzacha, Meladtecha, Beis Avicha. All are 3 forms of subjectivity that really keep us trapped. Think of any epiphany, any revelation you ever had. What is a revelation? What is an epiphany? A new awareness. It means that you were open to hear something new that you didn't hear yesterday. But how often do we like to fit new ideas into old frameworks? We all do that. You have your framework. So you hear a new idea. That's why you don't have brilliant innovators all the time. Innovation means the ability to not be shaped by previous preconceptions, even if they're good ones. You look at the labs, these futuristic labs at Google or Microsoft or MSNBC. A few years ago, last year actually, I had an opportunity with clearance and all that to go into one of their futuristic places in New York, which is very, they don't let anyone in there. Like what the technology will look like in 20 years from now. It's like a crazy place. Like everything goes. And you walk in, the whole thing, you put on goggles, it's like a virtual reality. And the people working in these places, if you look at their criteria for hiring, are only young people who don't have pre-experience with the web or with internet. Because any pre-experience is considered to be a liability, because you're going to define your next step based on your previous steps. So it's interesting that to really innovate requires a type of almost leap, like God told Abraham to leave that past, even if it's a good and healthy past. The Talmud has a fascinating story. There was a sage, his name was Rabbi Zera, and he was a great scholar, and in the Babylonian academies in Babylon, we call it Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. And the Talmud continues and it says one day he wanted to make Aliyah, he wanted to go to Israel and become part of the Jerusalem Academy. At the time when, after the destruction of the Second Temple, a little less than 2,000 years ago, there were two academies. One was centered in Babylon, where we have the Babylonian Talmud, and one was situated in Jerusalem, which was called the Jerusalem Talmud. And the Jerusalem Talmud was something he was not aware of, so he wanted to go from Babylon to join this new academy and learn the new approaches of the scholars and sages of this the Jerusalem Academy. And the Talmud then goes on and says a very weird thing. He fasted 100 fasts, did not eat, for 100 days, not in a row because nobody can do that, but over a period of time, in order to forget what he studied in the Babylonian Talmud, so he can learn the new approach and method of the Jerusalem Talmud. So the question is asked, since when do you have to forget one body of knowledge to accumulate a new body of knowledge? Knowledge is accumulative. What you know yesterday only helps you learn more, rebuild upon previous knowledge. You learn ABC, and then you learn words, and you learn paragraphs and ideas build to other ideas. Since when do you have to so-called delete previous ideas to gain new ideas? It's not a hard drive where you run out of room. And secondly, there's actually a prohibition that a person is not supposed to do anything to intentionally forget Torah. Torah is the sacred word of God, and we don't do things to forget. So what was Rabbi Zera's thinking? Why did he feel the need to forget what he had learned, and he fasted and prayed to do so? So the explanation given is that he did not forget the knowledge that he learned. He wanted to forget the method, the methodology. And the Babylonian method is different than the Jerusalem method. Two different methods of deduction. Babylonian method of deduction is through process of elimination, through a process of debate and argument, where you hear an opinion and another opinion, a counter-argument. You ever see Jews argue? It's based on the Babylonian Talmud. Right? Counter-arguments, and this one says an idea, this one comes to the exact opposite extreme. It's never just in the same field, it's a completely extreme. And you stretch and maneuver and manipulate an idea, massage an idea, till you get a crystal clear conclusion. It's a brilliant process of coming to a very clarity, because when you've weighed every option and you've gone from one extreme to the next, you can pretty much rest assured that you've covered your bases. Never perfect. That's the Babylonian approach. In the Jerusalem approach, the method was a certain type of clarity. It's like sometimes you right away begin with a certain idea and you stick with it and then you develop it. Not really through questions and answers and argument. So these two methods are completely different, and he was so accustomed to the first method, what he wanted to forget was not the knowledge that he learned, the facts, the information. The method. It was a method. And that, of course, is an unbelievable thing, because we all have certain ways we think. Some of us are intuitive thinkers. You come to you see something and you come to a certain, not necessarily conclusion, but a certain way of looking at it. And then you flesh it out. Other people build information. They call a difference between, let's say, a visual thinking person and an audio thinking person. What's the difference between visual and audio? When you see something, you right away see the whole picture, and then you break it into pieces. And you see a painting, you see the whole picture, and you break it and say, okay, now it's made up of these components. When you listen, it's the other way around. You hear words, you hear pieces, and the pieces add up to a puzzle. So people, there are really two different methods of the way we work. You can think about it, how you work, and not one of them is superior necessarily to the next. Each has its strength, each has its power. So that was what Rabbi Zera wanted to do. In a way, that was his lech lecha. That in order to achieve great new levels of awareness you have to in some way be ready to let go of a previous perspective. Because as long as you're trapped by that perspective, even if it's a good perspective, you're not going to hear a new idea. You'll always fit new ideas into your old models and old patterns. And you'll see people who are able to get out of that are the ones that are open to something new, and so on. Of course, it's a balance. It's a balancing act, because this doesn't mean that what you know from the past should be discarded. But in a way, it's like almost suspending for a moment perspectives you've had, and allowing a new idea in, and saying, you know, let me consider it, and not just in a blanket way just dismiss it. So the Lech Lecha that God tells Abraham is that you have to leave three types of subjectivity behind if you're going to grow. One is your own personal subjectivity, your natural subjectivity. We all have natural subjectivity, natural biases. It's called in Hebrew, Adam Karav Eitzel Atzmei. A person, self-interest is always going to bias us. This is why lawyers or judges have to recuse themselves if they are in any way biased. If it's a family member, or they have a personal interest or business interest. Because even if you're an intelligent person, bias is bias. Sheichid ya'avr einei chachamim, the Torah says, bias blinds the eyes of the wise. You can be a very wise person, but bias subjective interest will definitely bias you. And as a matter of fact, if you don't know where they bias you, that's even worse, because you can't even identify where subtly it may have shaped your opinion. So that's one form of subjectivity. This, by the way, does not mean that self-interest is a bad thing per se. If you're aware of it, and you know when to use it, and when to put it aside, not to allow it to bias your position, it's perfectly fine. It gets destructive when you deny it, and you say, no, it's not self-interest, it's objective. In other words, your subjectivity tells you that you should say you're objective. Then it's already distortion. The second form of subjectivity that we all have are parental influences. Beis avicha, as God says to Abraham. Parental influences. We are, as they say, our mother's daughters and our father's sons. Actually, our father's sons and daughters and our mother's sons and daughters. Which means, whether you like it or not, much of your ideas and many of your attitudes were shaped a long time ago, long before you really had choice. Attitudes, as a little child, you pick up consciously, unconsciously, from the way your parents behaved, for good or for bad. And some of these things are not very easy to escape. As much as sometimes we don't want to be like our mother or our father, the older you get, the more you turn into them. And I guess that's what happened to them when they were from children to adults. So if we have healthy parents, great. It's great to be shaped by, some of us. I mean, I'm sure many of you feel, and I know for myself, my father passed away a few years ago. There are things I see in myself that I really truly thank him, that I picked up from him. But it also means I must have gotten some things from him that are not necessarily the best. And when we talk about really dysfunctional homes, unfortunately, parents can really screw somebody up, to use the vernacular. So parental influences are a very big force. Attitudes, how they reacted to things, how they problem solved, how they didn't problem solve, how they loved each other, our parents, will all shape attitudes. And often it takes years for us to, I don't know if you could ever undo it, but years to even look at it. So that's the second, Beis Avicha. And then the third form of subjectivity, which is what God tells Abraham, is peer pressure, social pressure. The need to be accepted. Society word. And this we all have as well. This affects us. How others look at us. Like they say, what is the expression that the cynics say? That people don't, what is it? It's not like what I think, how I see myself. It's not how I see others, it's how I see others see me, is what defines a lot of our attitudes. Which means it's a vicious cycle of the blind leading the blind, I guess is the expression. Or, we're all looking at each other and who really defines it. So television producers will say, we create this low common denominator television because that's what the public wants. The public says, well, this is what we have no other choice, that's what they produce. So who really is calling the shots? So everyone blames the advertisers. But the advertisers don't really care. They just want to advertise wherever people are watching. So we're in that little vicious cycle. So the third form of subjectivity is the societal influences. So if you combine these three biases, these three subjectivity, natural subjectivity, parental influence, Beis Avicha, and social influences, It's a pretty heavy load of forces that shape us. So when you ask the question, who are you? If you're an honest person, you have to say, I'm not really sure. Are you you, or are you a product of your environment, your parents, your own self-interest? It's not a simple matter to really say, I'm going on a journey to find myself. Because as I said, you can embark on a journey with great intentions, but the shackles that hold you are these subjective forces. And that's why this is such a powerful and brilliant statement that God says to Abraham, which is relevant to all of us. You want to make a move in your life, you want to travel, you want to discover yourself. First thing is identify that which blinds you. You may not completely identify, but you have to get out of that environment. And think about the first time you left home to go to summer camp or school or travel. So on one hand, it's a little scary the first time a child leaves home. Most children cry when they leave home the first time. Parents cry as well. There's some parents that don't cry. That's another story. So there's a certain, we call separation anxiety, whatever you call it, empty nest syndrome. But on the other hand, when you think about yourself, the first time you went off on your own, so of course you made mistakes, we all do. There are plenty of risks. But that's when you begin to discover yourself. You suddenly realize, hey, I can do this, I can do that. Because as much as parents, even the most healthiest parents who love us, we're still in their shadows. We're still a product, we're still their child. And that's why we cannot thrive really in our own homes. You have to at some point leave your home. You have to cut the umbilical cord, as they say. Not just physically, but also psychologically. This doesn't mean we leave our parents behind, God forbid. It means that you have to have some element of independence, and hopefully a combination of standing on the shoulders of those giants before us, and then finding our own individual voice. That combination can be a formidable force. But the fact is, most people are still products of that past. And that's why God's statement to Abraham is a statement to all of us. So I'm saying all of this in a way, my journey has been quite interesting. As I said, over 25 years ago, that leads me to why we're sitting here. And being that I was sitting in a lech lecha situation because I was speaking to people of different backgrounds, different attitudes, completely different mindset. As I said, many things we absolutely disagreed about, but we did not personalize it. It wasn't petty. You know, you can disagree with someone, it doesn't mean you have to be at war. It doesn't mean you have to hate the person or dislike. It's ideas. You share ideas. On the contrary, when you have someone that disagrees with you, they can teach you a lot more about your ideas, because now you have to so-called prove yourself. You're not just take it for granted. You know, there are people who all they know is their position, and all they want to hear from others is a reinforcement of their own position. It can't be challenged. Being challenged is the greatest thing in intellectual discourse. As I said, that's why the Talmud Bavli is so powerful. You know, the whole legal system, lawyers today, even the Jewish, non-Jewish, the process, that whole process of debate and argument and so on, is a very healthy process. When does it become unhealthy? When it's personalized, when it becomes acrimonious, when it becomes driven by other agendas, and you personalize. You know, if I once heard the story that there was a guy, he was an older fellow, and he had difficulty getting married, so he went into a Rebbe to ask him for a blessing. And the Rebbe asked him, where do you live? He says, I live home. So you're 45 years old, you live home. Okay. With his parents, in other words. And do you disagree with anything with that your parents say? No, he loves them, we really get along very well. And the Rebbe said to him, this rabbi said to him, it's a bad sign. That the 45-year-old man is living with his parents and never disagrees, something seriously wrong. Now, obviously that rabbi was not suggesting that you have to fight with your parents just to fight, but it means individuals. It's inevitable there's going to be disagreements. They don't have to turn into, as I said, wars and invalidating each other. But if there's no disagreement, it means, so where's your voice? With everything, you know, we all have a unique voice. That's what makes us special. So I could say that this class here, whatever you want to call it, has been for me both a challenging and extremely gratifying. It changed my life, to be honest. I don't know if I would be who I am today. So as I said, I want to thank all of you for that, and thank the web audience as well. And the feedback, and they say in the Talmud, the sage says, I learned much from my teachers, I learned even more from my colleagues, but above all I learned from my students. That I could say that very clearly. And more importantly, I've been taught also that we never know who's the student and who's the teacher. I could be doing the speaking, and you're the listening, but that doesn't mean that I'm the teacher. You could be teaching me more than I'm teaching you. So the question who's holding their mouth open, that's another story. But so that has been really I could say, the essence of this class. Since you're here, I will say that due to the graciousness of the East Village, the community, and the community synagogue on 6th Street, Mrs. Pace, right? I forgot your first name? Brenda, okay, sorry about that. So Brenda is a daughter of one of the founders of the synagogue, is that right? 1940, which is, we're going to be doing the high holidays there, and hopefully a lot of programming, and in many ways has grown out of this class. So it's interesting how things evolve. So I'm mentioning that as the loop continues. But really, we're on a long journey, and the journey is much longer than this group here. The Jews have been gathering like this for thousands of years. And actually in the Torah there's an expression, Vayakel Moshe, Moshe gathered, Moses gathered the people. And before Moses passed away, he actually suggested and passed a decree, so to speak, a custom, that Jews should gather together on Shabbos and holidays, which is where the custom comes from, why we have Torah classes. It was really Moses instituted that thousands of years ago, because he knew, in a way, long before there were 12-step programs and other, what we call today, synergy and the wisdom of the crowds, he knew the power of a group. And Vayakel, a kehila, a kohol, is a group. The power of a group, when it's not obliterating or annihilating individuals, is extremely powerful. It's a synergetic force that's more than the sum of the parts. An interesting phenomenon. Two people can lift a weight more than twice each of them. What do I mean by that? If you can lift, let's say, 100 pounds on your own, and I can lift 100 pounds on my own, together we can lift more than 200 pounds. Something like 220 pounds. 3 people, it exponentially grows. The Talmud makes a whole calculation about this. When the scouts came back, as they carried the fruit from Israel, how many people carried a certain weight. So where is this invisible energy coming from? If I can only lift 100 and you can only lift 100, how can we lift together more than 200? So this is what they call today synergy. In Hebrew, there's actually expression in the Kabbalah and mysticism that says ha'er ha'ela al kulana, which means the energy that's more than the sum of the parts. Think of it as letters. Let's say the word, what is your Hebrew name?
Bela.
Bela, okay. So Bela is made up of letters, Beis, Yud, Lamed, Aleph. Is that how it's spelled? So if you look at the letters themselves, a Beis is just a Beis, a Yud is a Yud, another Yud, a Lamed, Aleph. But when you put them together, they're more than the sum of the parts. It's not just a combination of 5 letters. It's a new word. So there's a synergy that happens when there's a connection between each of us. But of course, as I said, that's predicated that we don't annihilate each other. In other words, when a group becomes group mentality that annihilates individuality, that of course is destructive. So that's the balance that is always required. How you create a community, at the same time respect individuality and allow everyone to thrive. And that takes, first of all, being secure yourself. You'll see secure people can coexist with other secure people. Insecure people cannot, because they always think someone's taking something away from them. And I think that is very much part of the spirit of true gathering, as I said, Moses instituted. So that was, I would call it, like the guy, the orator who gets up and says, before I say a few words, I'd like to give an introduction. So this was a little of an introduction, but it's also relevant to our discussion. The theme of this evening, which we chose, is based on this week's chapter in the Torah. As I've discussed many times, the Jewish calendar is a mirror image of our own lives and the cycles of our own lives. So just like we go through ups and downs in life, you'll see the Jewish calendar, the saddest part of the calendar, which we just concluded actually, the month of Av, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day, the destruction of the temple. Leading now, as we just entered the new month of Elul, the month of love, Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, I am to my beloved is to me, which is an acronym for the word Elul, from the book Song of Songs. Again, a symbiotic relationship. It's not a relationship that goes one way. I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me, which means that there's a partnership. If you'll see in a relationship where only one person is giving love and the other is just receiving love, it's usually not a healthy thing. There are times where one has to give and perhaps the other cannot give at the time. Everyone goes through their rhythms, but it can't be exclusively that way. A good relationship is a reflective one, like kamayim haponim leponim, kain leva odam laodam. As a face is reflected in the water, a heart is reflected in another. Words from the heart enter the heart. So this time of the season is like when we move from the destruction of the temple, sadder times, and we're moving, of course, to happier time, a month of love. Virgo is the sign of the month, and it leads, of course, into the high holidays, which is the height of the year: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah. So it's a powerful time, and if we personalize it, and not just look at it as a calendar thing, that's really you, the story of your life. This is a great opportunity to move from your own sadness to a happier moment, because the energy, so to speak, of this month is an energy of that type of connection, and between each other, anila daidu daily, between us and God, and that's why it's called the month of preparation. We actually prepare. We blow the shofar every morning as a preparation for the high holidays. It's a month of introspection, of accountability, and it's a month to prepare to meet our partner in existence. You probably know what I mean, right? God. So it's a partnership, which also dispels another myth that people have, that God and the creation are like there's only a one-way street. That God is the creator and we're the creatures and that's it. No, it's a relationship. There's an expression in the Talmud that Hashem says, God says, Shutif la'kadosh baruch hu b'maaseh bereishis. I want you to be a partner with me in creation. One of the Roman philosophers asked Rabbi Akiva once, if God wants little boys to be circumcised, why aren't they born circumcised? Why are you tampering with God's creation? So Rabbi Akiva wisely answered, if God wanted us to have bread, why didn't He just plant bread in the ground? God gives us the resources, like a good partnership. But one partner provides the resources, the funds, and the other has to develop it. So we're given the ability to plant grain in the ground. Then we have to care for the land, and then water it, then wait till it will grow, then cut it, thresh it, and then turn it into flour, mix the flour with water, and turn it into bread. I don't know how many steps that is. 20 steps, 30 steps. It's a partnership. And this is true for everything. You're born with particular gifts, each of us. You're given resources. You're given faculties. Each of us in a different way. Ein deis ein shavos. No two people think alike. None of us are exact clones. We have different personalities. And what we do with these resources is up to us. You can have talents and resources and not use them, God forbid. They remain potential, not actualized. Who actualizes them? That's up to each of us. So it's a partnership. And Elul captures that partnership. And the whole holiday season, the high holiday season, is about renewing the contract with our partner. So it's not like many people have this, there's almost like the stereotype that before Rosh Hashanah you have to tremble before God because God is judging you and look how sinful you are. You know, I've often told the story, but I usually save the story before Rosh Hashanah, but I might as well tell it because it just comes to mind. Of this, in the Baal Shem Tov's times, his students was once before Rosh Hashanah this month, and they asked the Baal Shem Tov, where can they learn how to really prepare for the new year? So he sent them to this town, and he said, stay in this and this inn, and you'll learn from the innkeeper. That innkeeper will teach you. They come to the town, they rent a room, and they look at the innkeeper. It doesn't seem like anything special, or some type of unique individual, but the Baal Shem Tov said, so they kept their eyes open. So good, Shabbos came. There was the Shabbos of Slichas, the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah or a week before Rosh Hashanah, Saturday night. Just open up with like a preparatory prayers. It's like Slichas that we start saying. Ashkenazim, Sephardim actually start saying it every day in Elul. They always begin the beginning of the month. So everyone got up at midnight or 1 a.m. and they said the Slichas, and then everyone went to sleep. But they're keeping their eyes open, and they suddenly hear in the front room, they hear the innkeeper who didn't go to sleep, he's doing something. So they they open the door, and they peek out, and they see the innkeeper goes up to a shelf, and he pulls down two big ledgers. And he puts them on the table, and he didn't know that they were watching. They were peeking, watching what he's going to do. And he opens ledger number one, and ledger number one, he starts reading all the iniquities, all his transgressions over the year. You can imagine his transgressions. That one morning he woke up a little late for davening. There's another time he wasn't that kind to his wife. He started reading his list. Okay, then he finishes, and they were all waiting. What about ledger number 2? What is that about? He opens up ledger number 2 and starts reading, and he's saying to God, and here are all the things that you didn't do that I asked you to do. Like I prayed that you should keep my wife healthy, and she was sick for a month. Didn't have enough money to send my children to school for a while. The cow didn't give milk. This thing, and he had a whole list of grievances. And then they all went, what's going to happen now? He has these both ledgers open, his transgressions and his complaints, and he says, look, God, I wasn't perfect and you weren't so perfect. So listen, let's call it even, and we'll start a new year in the right way. So this is what the Baal Shem Tov students learned how to start for the new year. Now this was not meant to be sacrilegious, because he was sincere, it wasn't a game. It means our relationship with God does not have to be one that strikes fear in our hearts about how we're going to be judged and so on. It's not all about guilt and fear. If you watch Woody Allen movies, you'd think that's all it is. The stereotype. And I understand why, because the fact remains that many rabbis, for whatever reason, whether it's out of ignorance or out of good intentions, feel they have to drive the fear of God into people's hearts. So many Jews, the only time of the year they go to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to the synagogue, the speech will usually be, how come nobody ever comes to synagogue? So great, that really is going to encourage you to really start coming. Now that he said that, I'm not really I know I'm a rabbi, so it's like weird for some people to hear like rabbi jokes from me, but I have to share one that I heard recently. That and I remember it was I was in Boston for a Shabbos. I was doing a Shabbaton actually, and I was scheduled to speak after the reading of the Torah. So before the reading of the Torah, one of the people in the audience comes over and whispers a joke in my ear, and I literally, I couldn't stop laughing through the whole reading of the Torah. It was embarrassing actually. It was just, those moments a certain joke, it just hits your funny bone, and you just can't, you keep reminding yourself, and you just can't stop laughing. And I have to give my talks. I couldn't leave the room or anything. The only way I really could diffuse it was by telling the joke, of course. And it was really like a joke on me almost, but because the joke was like this. I mean, as I said, it may not strike you as funny, but at that moment it struck me very funny. I hope I don't lose my control of my laughter, and I do have to continue this class. But laughter is a good medicine anyway, right? So how does the joke go? Oh, there was this rabbi who every week he would give his sermon. So the president of the shul, who sat behind him, so the rabbi would stand by the lecture, and the president behind him would, within 5 minutes of the speech, was asleep. And sometimes noisily asleep as well. And it was embarrassing. The rabbi couldn't turn around and everyone's watching the rabbi speak, and behind him is a snoring president. So it's not really conducive to really listen. So finally the rabbi had enough, so he tells the gabbai, how do we call a gabbai? The beadle? the so-called, the guy that keeps an order going. How do you call a gabbai? The bouncer. No. A ritual man. Okay.
The financial president.
Right. Every gabbai is a different thing. Anyway, he tells the gabbai. The gabbai is usually the guy that calls people up to the Torah and stuff like that.
It's like the usher.
Yeah. Listen, certain words are impossible to translate. A gabbai is like many things in one. So he tells the gabbai, listen, if the president falls asleep again next Shabbos, I'm commanding you to go over and take the piece of wood that you use, to make quiet, and give it and slap him in the back of his head, get him wake him up. Okay, so the gabbai, I guess he had his way to get his score with the president as well. So he was more than happy to oblige. Okay, the rabbi gets up, he starts his speech, and rest assured, the president is asleep. So the gabbai goes, sneaks up near him, and gives him this bang across his head. Anyway, the president gets all like this, and he says, "Hit me again, I still can hear him." And that was the joke. Okay, so in in case you're ever giving a speech, and you feel that you lost the audience, tell this joke. At least you get a laugh, maybe at your own expense, but you get a laugh. So, if anybody needs to be hit here, you'll be the guy back. I'm not, just for the record, I'm not encouraging using violence, of course. That's not the point of the story. You have to be politically correct. Someone will come across that. Look at this. So, with that being said, the point is, Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, we're in a month that teaches us that it's a relationship with God. And yes, it's true, when you have a relationship, you're accountable. So Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment, but it's not judgment a one-way street. Judgment like, we have to sit and shudder what will be. It's a relationship. As a matter of fact, the Torah, one of the codifiers of Jewish law, writes that why do Jews dress white when they go into the high holidays? Whether it's a kittel or different people, why they dress white? They said because there was a custom once upon a time that when you were innocent, you dressed white. When you were guilty, you dressed in black. And here, it's before Rosh Hashanah. So how could you know that you're innocent? He says, because this is his words. I'm translating from the Hebrew. Because Jews are a very special, unique people. They know the personality of God and God's compassion. And they're convinced, even before Rosh Hashanah begins, that they will be innocent. So they dress white even before the judgment day begins. This is the Torah. This is not my New Age take on it. It's actually a statement. It means that the relationship with God is a beautiful one of love. God did not create the universe to destroy it. God created human beings for us to be partners with God. Yes, we can destroy ourselves and destroy the world in the process, but that's our call. So when it comes to this month is a month to look forward to, where you meet your partner, basically, and it's good to be accountable, by the way, even though we may not like it. It's accountability, and it's accountability to each other. As that simple innkeeper knew, he had a relationship with God. He could get up and say, "Here's what I did, and here's what you did, and let's call it even, and we'll start a new year." So, within these weeks of Elul itself, each chapter of the Torah has its own particular message. So one of the themes I was going to touch upon was in this week's chapter. It talks about, we're now in the book of Deuteronomy, the last of the 5 books. This is a book, the entire book is actually said, the entire book transpires in a period of 37 days. From the day when they arrived at the River Jordan, 40 years the Jews traveled through the wilderness, and then they arrived at the River Jordan on the east bank, ready to enter the Promised Land. But then Moses is told, and Moses knew that he will not enter, sadly. So the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy begins, Eila hadvarim asher dibra Moshe. These are the words that Moses would speak. That Moses spoke where? On the east bank of the River Jordan. And it begins Rosh Chodesh Shvat. The new month of Shvat, Moses began to speak. What did he begin to speak? He began reviewing what had happened the last 40 years. The exodus from Egypt, the events at Sinai, the travel through the wilderness. And we all know Moses would pass away on the 7th of Adar. So the 7th of Adar is the conclusion of the book of the Torah. So the entire book of Deuteronomy transpires from Rosh Chodesh Shvat till the 7th of Adar. So it's 37 days. And it's really Moses' last will and testament that he leaves us all. Not just the Jews of that time, but also for all of us. And there are many things that Moses repeats and reviews that happened earlier. But also there are many things that he says in this book that we did not know about when we read earlier books. So one of the things he talks about in this chapter is Israel, of course. You will enter this promised land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's a land that consists of, he says, of 7 nations. The 7 nations occupied it. They were the true occupiers of the Holy Land. And then he says, Im yarchiv Hashem elokecha es gvulcha. If God will expand your boundaries, then you'll also expand into 3 more lands. And Rashi explains, what does that mean, yarchiv? The commentaries explain that will be in the Messianic age, at the end of days, at the end of time, when Israel will expand, and it will be not just a land made up of 7, but of 10 so-called components. So as I always stress and emphasize here in this class, all these details in the Torah, with the Torah which is called a blueprint for life. The Torah is compared to an architect's blueprint. Are not just archaic historical notes of things that happened thousands of years ago, but they also have relevance to us today. So we read about it not just to remember what happened, but to relive it, and psychological lessons, spiritual lessons, personal lessons. So the Kabbalists, the mystics, Arizal, the Zohar, and even in the Talmud, discuss these 7 and 10 lands, what they are. And they actually discuss them in a very personal, psychological way. That each of us is made up of, each of us is like a mini Israel, basically. We're like an Israel in microcosm. We call Eretz Yisrael, and there's the Am Yisrael. So each person is like a as it says in one of the holy books, it says that the whole universe is made up of time, space, and soul. Or some call it today time, space, and man. Time, space, and Olam, Shana, Nefesh. So everything that exists in space also exists in time, and everything that exists in time and space also exists within the soul. So they're all microcosms of each other. That's a fundamental principle in Jewish thought. So Israel is a piece of geography, but there is also, psychologically, spiritually speaking, an Israel within each of us. And the lessons of Israel are lessons that are relevant to all of us. So when you say, for instance, to reach your promised land, it doesn't just mean going physically to the land. It ultimately means physically as well. But what was Moses really so aspiring to when he wanted to enter the promised land? So the Talmud says, what he was looking for, a sightseeing tour? He liked the land for its physical attributes? No, it's because there was a holy land and he wanted to be able to connect to God in ways you cannot connect to God in the wilderness. It was more about a spiritual connection that happens in this holy place. So with that being said, the Kabbalists explain that each of us are made up of 7, 10 components. So you may have heard of the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres are 10 faculties that each of us have. Psychologically speaking, we have 7 emotional faculties and 3 intellectual ones. Basically, when we say the mind and the heart. So the mind is a reflective faculty. It reflects. As I mentioned earlier, a mind can be subjective, but a mind on its own is truly a very objective organ. It should be processing information without any subjective interests. The heart, on the other hand, is an impulsive entity. If we only had emotions and no mind, we could be manipulated, we can get into trouble. The mind, in a sense, is like gives us direction, guidance. The heart experiences and the mind directs when they're working at their best. So take any situation, your mind analyzes, processes, is careful and cautious, and then it tells your heart it's safe to move forward. This should be the case in any healthy situation, whether you're dating someone, whether it's a business relationship, whether you're exploring something. So exploration should be primarily driven before you come to a conclusion by your mind, so you don't we can be emotionally manipulated. And then the mind tells the heart, okay, this is safe now. It's past my so-called checks and balances. You can allow it into your life. What many mistakes we make in life happen when our heart takes over before the mind finished its analysis. Let's say you get into a bad relationship. What happened? You so-called fall in love with someone, and then you find out the worst person. What happened was your emotions took over, and your mind was silenced due to your own either instant gratification or other forces that took over control, and you make mistakes. Think about most mistakes human beings make, and you'll find they usually are due to not enough reflection. Like think about last time somebody, let's say, insulted you or said something negative. What's our reaction? Often impulsively, we reciprocate. And we sometimes say things we later regret. Think, next time somebody says something or hurts you in any way, before you do anything, sleep over the issue overnight. You'll see once the anger subsides, you'll be able to be more sober, more reflective, and you usually make less mistakes. Most mistakes happen in moments of passion, moments of emotional anxiety, when we're distraught, etc., etc. Now, doesn't mean emotions are a bad thing. It means that there's a relationship here, where the mind is like the captain of the ship, and the emotions are the ship. Because on the other hand, if you only had a mind and no heart, you'd be a computer, a dead, cold, and analytical brain that would never experience anything, would never take risks, would never have a sense of adventure, no spontaneity. So this is a dance that we all have to learn to balance. It's not always that simple. And when it works well, the mind, in a sense, checks things out and then allows the heart to enter. Now, of course, I have to the disclaimer always has to be stated. This is not referring to a situation where you're in danger and your heart tells you there's something wrong. You don't have to sit down and start analyzing. Sometimes you just have to get out of danger if that's what your intuition tells you. You can make mistakes as well. So, but overall, especially situations where you do have certain sense of certain control, requires really a balance between the two. So in Jewish thought, there's a lot of discussion about this heart-mind balance, and they compare it to these 7 and 10 lands, that the expanding of the boundaries, so to speak. Now, what is the point? The point is this: on one hand, there's a verse in the Tanakh that says that one of the messianic prophecies, it says, "V'hasiresi leva evan," God says, "I will remove from you your heart of stone, and I will replace it with a heart of flesh." So one of the rabbis asked the question, why does it say heart? What about those that have a mind of stone? Why doesn't it say that God will replace the mind of stone with a mind of flesh? You know, there are people who are obstinate in their thinking and that you can't get them to budge. You know? Have you ever met anyone like that? Anybody? Never, huh?
I am one like that.
You are like that?
Sometimes.
Oh. To acknowledge that takes a little courage. It's very, very nice. Usually I hear people say it about their partner, you know. I once gave a talk, actually, and I was saying this, and a woman kept pointing to her husband that he's like that. And so I, you know, just by her doing that, I realized that she's probably more like that than he is. So after I finished the talk, she says to me, "What happens if you have a husband that's exactly like you just described?" You know? And she goes on and on and on, doesn't stop. So I said, "Well, is he here tonight?" She says, "Yeah, he's sitting here." So I said, "Let's hear what he has to say." And he literally opens his mouth and starts saying like a half a word, and she right away goes into another tantrum. So I said, "Why don't you let him say a few words, you know? Maybe this is..." So, I mean, she like demonstrated. It was a good example. But once you know it, you know, half the cure of a disease is awareness. Once you know it, it's already a little salvation. So why does the Torah then not use expression, the changing of the heart of flesh, mind of stone? And the interesting answer to this, because a mind of stone we have in our control. A heart of stone you may not have control over, and you need God's help. When a person is emotionally locked, it's not easy to just change that. You know, let's take a young child, and a young child comes running to its mother and father and saying, "I'm very scared. I think there's a ghost in the closet." And you can sit all day and analyze and rationalize and tell the child there's no such thing as ghosts, don't be afraid of the dark. It's not going to help, because it's not intellectual. It's not intellectual. It's an emotional reaction. And you just have to hold your child's hand until they feel the courage, and then maybe open the closet and show there's nothing in there. Because emotional fears are not just dismissed with some type of intellectual explanation. Or let's say a person's in deep pain. You know, many of us are very difficult to go to a shiva call. You know, we should never have to go to one. You know, what do you say? The truth is, you say nothing. There's nothing to say. You know, I consoled many people, but when I had to sit shiva myself for my father's passing, it's not what people say. What can you say in a moment of loss? You could hold someone's hand. You could say, "I'm with you. I cry with you." Like one Rebbe once said to his student, "I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you." That gives each other power, because the most brilliant brain cannot speak to a bleeding heart. It's not the same language. It's like two languages. The mind does not speak the language of emotions. So to know that means that sometimes the heart, if a person has a heart you need that God should remove the heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. But the mind, there we have much more control. That is in the control of a person, because there's no person that cannot free themselves from being blocked intellectually. Because your mind should not in any way have to be locked. Why do people have locked minds? I'll tell you why. Because their hearts are blocked, and they're letting the heart affect their mind. That's what's happening. It's not because the mind itself is blocked. Because think of it this way: you can explore Any person that's intellectually curious explores ideas that may not be agreeable to you. You don't have to act on them. You don't have to agree with them. So why not explore something, maybe a new way of looking at something? Why would you have fear and say, no, I can't even look at a new way? Because your heart is so afraid, doesn't want to hear that may be a new way, because then it may have to impact on you. So that's why the Torah says wisely that the brain is in your hands, your mind. That is not what God will remove. If you don't want to hear a new perspective, even God in a way cannot do anything for you. Because then it's like you close your ears. So when you talk about this 7 and the 3, it's like saying that in this time in the 7 referred to the 7 emotions, and the 3 to the intellectual faculties, that there's something that enters into our existence, that we react to things emotionally, and then there's a stage where we introduce the mind into the picture, and that is really what is in our power and our control. So I don't know if you've ever heard the concept in psychology called the cognitive life raft. Cognitive life raft is used sometimes in the context where if a person has been emotionally traumatized or emotionally blocked, so they, in a way, you can train yourself to escape on a cognitive life raft. It's almost like having like a dream or a fantasy that takes you to another place. It's like almost when you're listening to music and it transports you to another time and place. And then you come back to reality, which may not be so pleasant. So there's a certain cathartic effect, certain healing effect from that. What is it? Because you saw with your mind, you could see something new, and it may give you hope. So when you go back to so-called a more depressing situation, it's like a cognitive life raft. Now, of course, it becomes destructive if you only live in a cognitive life raft, which is what we call people who live in their heads, and they are afraid to engage life. So everything is in their head. They're playing mind games with themselves, with others. But there are times that it's very healthy to have a cognitive life raft, because it helps you imagine situations. It's like imagining a situation that is beyond you, and then emotionally it becomes easier to perhaps enter there. So having certain so-called meditations, or reflect on certain goals, like they always tell you, tell me what your dream is. What is your wish list? So you could say, well, what difference does it make? You may never achieve it. No, because if you can imagine it, you're already better than if you can't. When you're really trapped, you can't even imagine getting out of it. What really kept the Jewish people alive over all these centuries? Because they always were able to dream. But it wasn't a dream unrealistic. It was the promise that God told Abraham, that after all the suffering, there will be ultimately salvation. There's no doubt in my mind that our ancestors in Egypt, that's what kept them going. They knew, as dark and as threatening the situation was in Egypt, that we will get out of this place. And if it's not us, it will be our children. And that's what happened. Look today, the Jewish people, in an unprecedented way, live in freedom. Many of us take it for granted. I take it for granted. I grew up in this, I was born in this world, in this freak America. But my parents were born in Stalinist Russia. Many of you, or your parents, or grandparents, were born in situations that were far from where we are, that we could not sit quietly in an evening like this and just talk Torah and nothing, as if nothing's happening. To sit in a room like this 100 years ago, 200 years ago, was not something that was easy. There were informers, and there were police, and there were who knows what, inquisitions, a pogrom any moment. So this is a great gift, but it comes on the sole shoulders of those that stood before us. And that's a vital thing to know, that the freedom that we have is coming from many years. So if our grandparents are able to see us, and I'm sure they're able to see us from heaven, they see that yes, their dreams. And when they said it, for example, in the Birchat HaMazon, the blessing we say after the meal, what do we say? Uvnei Yerushalayim, Yer HaKadosh, that Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Now, why should we mention Jerusalem being rebuilt in a blessing after a meal? It's one thing when we say after a meal, thank you God for giving me my food, for sustaining me, providing. Why is Jerusalem suddenly part of the picture? Because when a Jew eats a meal, it's not just a meal. The meal is also saying that we can move on and know that we dream about a better future. It's not just about sustaining our bodies, it's also about our souls. And that's why you find throughout the prayers constant reference to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, to Mashiach, to a better world. 7, interesting, out of the 18 blessings in Shemona Esrei are all about the future, a better future. Because in the darkest moments, that's what gave people that type of hope. It's like seeing the end in mind, seeing that the destination will be reached. And there was a custom in the time of, there was a custom in the early times in the war that certain armies would sing a march of victory when they would, before they even began their first battle. Why? They haven't fought the first battle. But as I mentioned earlier, why we dress in white before Rosh Hashanah, when you sing a march of battle, the confidence that you have that you know you can win, you fight differently. Look what happened in Vietnam. The soldiers not only didn't know that they could win, they also didn't know what they were fighting for. You cannot fight if you have no destination in mind. And if you don't have the confidence that you can reach that destination, because you get demoralized. Someone will tell you, what are you fighting for? There's no light at the end of the tunnel. How could you continue to fight? And this is an unbelievable, I think, part of what our ancestors gave us, was that there is a future. And today, we live, as I said, in freedom. Against all odds. No one would have imagined 1950, 1945, after what happened in Europe, a third of the Jewish people were decimated, that we would be here today. So this whole idea of the 7 and the 3 is really about understanding the expanding of our boundaries. So of course you can ask the question, okay, we're all limited by our boundaries. How could mortals ever get out of our boundary? But the fact of the matter, you can dream about things that are greater, and then they can infuse your boundary with a deeper dimension. I know that you may go, so I don't want to, I know it won't offend me, by the way.
Excuse us.
No, it's all right. I just wanted to, because I want to add one more point, but it's great to see you.
Can't you
Send my
another way?
best regards downtown.
Thank you.
Good. So if you want, I'll go a little more. If you want a little more flight into the world of the abstract, if you're all up to it. So here's a very profound Kabbalistic concept. Because let me first pose the question, and then you'll see its significance. So here's the question: if emotionally we're locked, and yes, we can dream about something that's outside of our own realm, but ultimately we are mortal creatures. We have our limits. We can only jump that high. We can only run that fast. Even the fastest runners in the Olympics, there is a certain point. It'll never be zero. The 100 meters, right? So we are bound by certain inherent limitations. Why you disagree with may one day be zero? Yeah, for most of us it's zero. When you're watching it on television,
A particular sprinter, I think he's going to achieve it.
zero. No, we all achieve it zero by watching it. It takes us, you don't have to do it like that, right? If you don't run, it doesn't take any time. Like that old Jew in the marathon, he just stood by the destination and he was there before everybody. How'd you get here so fast? He said, they're all running. I just came here and that's it in the first place. They say there's another one with the archer, right? So the old Jew that was like shooting archery, there was this archer thing, and they see that he like 10 arrows in the bullseye. They said, "How'd you do it?" He said, "Well, he shot the arrows first, and then he painted the bullseye around." Well, there are tricks of the trade. So being that we are mortals with inherent limitations, physical ones, emotional ones, psychological ones, we are not immortal. So the question is, how far can we truly reach? Which is both a philosophical question and a psychological question. With all the efforts we will ever invest in our growth, so we'll reach a little more. But being mortals, we can never reach heaven, the skies themselves. So then if that's the case, okay, so one person is going to be a few inches ahead of another. How much hope does it give the human race? And the answer lies in this chapter about the 7 and the 10 in the following way. question really is, the borders that we know of in existence, who put those borders in place? So, if you believe in a God, you believe that God created the borders. So then the question is this: does God have borders? And if he doesn't have borders, how could he create borders? So the Kabbalists ask the question the following way: how can something that's infinite create something that's finite? So the Avodas HaKodesh, who's a great middle-aged scholar, Ibn Gabbai was his name, this mystic, so he writes the following memorable words. He says about God, he says, Kishem sheyesh lekeche v'bilti bal gvul, just as he has the ability to create and extend infinitely, kach yesh lekeche b'gvul, he also has the power to extend and to create the finite. And then he gives the reason for it. Because if you were to say that he could only create the infinite, that itself would make him finite. Only infinite and not finite. It's an interesting twist of logic. In other words, finite does not necessarily mean finite as opposed to infinite. Finite means it's this and not that. So if something is only bound, if something is limited to be infinite, that too is a finite statement. It's this and not that. So the mathematical set of infinite numbers is infinite and not finite. And the finite set is finite and not infinite. So he basically makes the statement, therefore, that God is neither infinite nor finite, that there's a state of being, if you can call it even being, that is neither of the two, and that's why it can create both, and more importantly, that they both are infused with each other. This is a fundamental principle in Jewish thinking, that even the boundaries of existence that seem so to us so formidable, really have within them embedded infinite power. And when you know how to tap it and not fight it, you can release infinite energy from finite boundaries. And that's the statement in Yachiv Hashem Erkecha Gvulcha, that when God will expand your boundaries, means that when you will do your work emotionally with the 7 levels, God will then expand the boundaries and allow you to achieve something that's boundless. Well, that's a nice intellectual concept, but where do we see it? Okay, so I'll give you a few examples where you see it play itself out. We live in a structured existence, and one of the most structured of all parts of our lives is music. Music has a structure. 7 notes, 12 notes to be complete, to be more accurate. And nobody will ever come, the greatest musician, composer, will ever come and ever create a new note in music. You know why? Because the spectrum of sound is only that, is finite, is limited. You can't create a new sound. Yet, when we talk about music, we always talk about music in the terms of almost like boundlessness. Music transports you to another time and place, transcends time and space. It lifts you up. We don't see music as some type of confining experience. We see it as a freeing experience. It lifts your spirit, you dance, you go out of yourself, you transcend. So here's a perfect example of a structured system, musical notes, but when played in the right way, has a power to lift you to another space. And in many ways, it's like the structure helps you transcend your structure. Now, when I first discovered this concept was when I was, as I said, a younger man, and it was unbelievably freeing to me, because I had this dilemma, as many of you may have had, or maybe you didn't, so maybe you'll have it from now on, was this: I always thought in terms that if you're trying to find, a free spirit is trying to find so-called infinite, to get beyond the monotony of life and reach to a place that's beyond the doors of perception, in the words of William Blake. Why is it then that the Torah and Judaism put so much focus on mitzvahs, actions, details? If you open up a Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law, and you don't know better, it seems like an unbelievable obsession with mechanics. Now, I grew up with this, but I did not necessarily just take it for granted, because I always wondered. I said, is these mechanics about finding the infinite, finding the divine? So, and many people who have had that question actually reject the details of the mitzvahs, because they say there's no way that such obsession with details can lead you to a free-spirited place. And actually, when you're familiar with Far Eastern philosophies, they are actually driven precisely about transcending and so-called getting away from the illusion of material existence and its details, to getting to a place of the light, a place that is infinite. In other words, the search for infinity means that you have to leave the finite behind. The finite includes your perceptions, all the confinements of our life. So I always struggle with this, and I asked many people, and of course, you usually are silenced, or it's not unacceptable questions. But then when I first studied and learned this concept, I had that aha moment, and I realized the profundity, that it is only when you're able to fuse detail and that which transcends detail is when you really get to the infinity. Because if you reach the infinite, what happens with the finite life if you have? Everybody needs to eat and sleep. We do have an existence that's structured. There's no way you can get out of that. So the only way is to escape it and almost ignore it and deny that it exists. And I came to realize that the mechanics of Judaism, yes, if it's misunderstood, it can be a terrible trap that traps people in the trap, that what we call being a mechanical Jew, doing it by rote, by habit, by patterns, because your parents programmed you that way and they were programmed that way. Or you can see it as musical notes. And if it's musical notes played with the right music, these are very structured musical notes, but they lead you to an infinite place. Which also teaches something about revolution. Any one of us that has revolutionary spirits know revolution means you want to change the world in some way. Now, of course, as we get older, usually those dreams start to wane somewhat. But they start to wane because you face reality and you say, it was nice idealism as I was young, but now I'm not so naive, and now I see it's not that simple, blah, 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 blah. Every one of us has our so-called excuses, why we throw in the towel. But I came to realize that revolution is much more profound than just breaking the status quo and breaking away from many patterns. True revolution happens when you're able to use the structure to transcend the structure. What that means is that there are certain rules to the game in this world, and often if you're a true free spirit, you don't want to be bound by any rules. But the true free spirits I discovered are the ones that know how to use the rules to get beyond the rules. So look, in Judaism you have the word halacha. Halacha means laws. Halacha. But the word halacha also comes from the word halicha, which means movement. So on one hand you can think of law as a very stringent, locked place. You have to do this and not this. The laws of Shabbos, the laws of Passover. You must eat matzah, you cannot not eat bread for 7-8 days. 8 days outside of Israel. And these are strict, they're not negotiable, not arbitrary, very strict, defined laws. So no different than musical structure. This is the music and this is it. This is the note that has to be played. So if you only know the mechanics, as I said, it can seem obsessive, it can seem almost ridiculous. But if you understand that these are details of a larger spirit, then think of it no different than programming language. Look at any program, has millions and millions of lines of code, or whatever the number is. Change one dot, add a dot, or take away a dot, and the whole program won't work. You can say, what's the difference, a dot, a detail? Yeah, it's a detail from our perspective, but it's not a detail when you understand that's part of a larger picture. It's like the guy who was looking for a shoelace tore. So he went up to the attic and saw a string. And he decided to cut the string and then get himself a shoelace. Suddenly the whole house heard a crash. The chandelier went flying. He thought it was a shoelace. The fact is, it was what tied the chandelier to the ceiling. So sometimes to us, what looks in our eyes a detail can be an essence. Think of the human body. Does anybody know how many cells are in the human body? 75 trillion cells. Trillion. Not billion, trillion cells. One mutant cell of 75 trillion can wreak havoc in a person's life and cause the unbelievable destruction. One cell, one mutant cell. So today, maybe in a mechanical world, a Newtonian physics, in a mechanical world where size mattered, you could say Yeah, one little thing compared to the whole thing standing. What's one little thing? But today, when we know the world of DNA, the world of chemical reactions, nuclear energy, subatomic particles, etc., 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 we know that details are not just details. They're part of a much bigger picture that we may never even fathom. And then you come to understand that the finite does mean the infinite. Because you know why? The finite is not finite, and the infinite is not infinite. It's only our limited perception that sees it as such, because we structure things that way. One of the things you learn when you study quantum mechanics, which is completely counterintuitive, is that your logic is your biggest blinding force. Your logic likes structure. When the first quantum theories were developed in the 20s, the 30s, what is known, let's say, as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, or you hear the Schrodinger's cat, etc., etc. Above time, within time. That's what we're doing tonight. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. I'm not here to give a crash course in the quantum mechanics, but one of the things that was so impossible to explain and understand, which was what made Einstein reject it all, was that fundamentally existence is a state of probability, not a state of definition. Which means that everything is really in an amorphous state when you talk about the core of existence, and you cannot define it as this or that. That's opposite of everything we understand. This is a table and not a chair. Look at our lives. We want organization. We want to know this is an apple, not an orange. Imagine someone saying, well, it could be half apple, half orange, you'll never know. It's very disconcerting to think of existence in a state of flux like that. But it's been proven hundreds and thousands of times and again, against intuition, against everyone's instinct. It's been proven that fundamentally existence at the core of it, on a microscopic level, not on a macroscopic. On a microscopic level is a state of probability. Means it's an amorphous state that can go two different ways. As I said, this is completely, if you've never heard this before, you probably think it sounds insane. Check it out. It's not my words, these are words of scientists. This isn't a Kabbalistic statement, even though the mystics have said it all along. They always said that the essence of existence was not what we see it as. So when we say something is finite and something is infinite, you have to add one small important caveat. In your perspective it is finite and infinite. The truth is, boundaries of existence being created by a force that's neither finite or infinite, maybe are infinite as well. You have to just know how to tap into it. And the way we tap into it is that by using the structure, that in the details you can come to experience something that transcends all details. And that's ultimately the meaning in this verse, in this week's chapter, Im Yarchiv Hashem Elokecha es Gvulcha, which means if you have your boundaries, we all have our emotional boundaries, and we don't feel we can ever free ourselves from it. When you allow yourself to dream, even this concept that I just described, to think about the infinite within the finite, and the finite within the infinite. So right now it may be a theory to you, but if you really personalize it, one day it may save your life. Because when you're in a locked place, that cognitive life raft can tell you, something? I'm only locked because I think I'm locked. It doesn't mean I'm truly locked. And it could be your mind that's locking you more than anything. When you give up hope, that can be more destructive than the actual predicament you're in. So that ability to dream, as I said our ancestors did, about a better world, is not just some flight of fancy escapism. It could actually be the thing that will lift you to that place. And I have no doubt in my mind that anyone that invented anything that was truly creative and real and original had an element of that. Think about it. Every time you take off on a plane, I always think about this. Imagine someone came to you 150 years ago and said, listen, I need you to invest in my new scheme, $50 I want. It was a lot of money then, but let's say. For what? What's your scheme? I'm going to fly one day. I'm going to create a metal box that's going to fly in the sky like a bird. The concept is ludicrous. I mean, it's a nice dream. People love to fly. People have tried to fly, but to create an object that's going to fly and defy gravity, you throw the guy out of your place. You're meshuggah, as they say in good old Yiddish. It's an English word today too. You know, yet there were people who probably were Meshuggah to some extent, and they set their mind to this. And today, we don't just have airplanes. We have airports. We have cities. We have all industries that are built around this. Change the world in every way. And it still defies logic. A plane actually is a very heavy object. You'd think you're going to fly, you have to really get something that's lighter, not something that's heavier. But that's not the case. They figure it out through scientific propulsion and so on and so forth, using actually as a bird as a model, how one defies gravity. So, seeing that, and then looking at some other innovations of the same, and these are not even religious discoveries, it is to me a religious conviction that a person sets his mind to something that's completely impossible to imagine and gets it done. I know a doctor, a very, very good doctor, he's a researcher. He calls himself an atheist. Yet, he's committed his life to fighting certain diseases that have still not been conquered in our time. And I always laugh, I always tell him, laugh with him. I said, for an atheist, you're sure a big believer. How are you so sure you're going to fight these diseases? Maybe some diseases are inconquerable. He says, no, there's no such thing. Can you imagine? I said to him, you're a religious fanatic, that's what you are. Okay? You just don't put it in religion, you put it in medical research. Where do you get this belief from? How do you know this? He knows it in his heart. Absolutely. Anything's doable, he tells me. Okay, so he has another name for God. He calls it, absolute belief in human medical knowledge. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So who cares what the name for it is? But people like that have that instinct, and they have changed the world. That really means that all of us have that power. But I would say most of us are afraid to access it. Number one, we're afraid of disappointment, that it won't work. And we don't have the courage to take the risk. And number two, we're afraid of our own selves. We don't necessarily believe in it. But the fact is that people are capable of things far beyond you're capable of things you're far beyond that you'll ever imagine. And that's why we study sometimes ideas that may seem beyond us, like this thing with the infinite and the finite, if nothing else, at least to know that there's a world far beyond your own. And yes, maybe makes you think about maybe your being so convinced that you're bound by the finite world is not necessarily so true. And if you don't want to see it in sources and mystical sources, go check out some quantum mechanic books, which are quite mystical in their own way, and they'll show you that what we know about reality is really very, very little. If you saw what the bleep we know and read about it, you'll see scientists will tell you that we know everything we know about existence is false, because it's our limited minds that look at it. This doesn't mean that we can't know, but it means that we know when we start understanding this mystery. And this mystery is also the mystery of love, because love is something you can never conquer or control. You begin to have love in your life when you surrender to something that's beyond you. As soon as you try to own it, or you try to, like a commodity, it will elude you. It is only when you have the courage to surrender to your own vulnerability and to things that are beyond you that you can find that power. Hence the connection between ani l'deidi v'deidi li, love, that reciprocal relationship I spoke about before, and this expanding of our boundaries. The real power of a relationship, it helps you expand your boundaries precisely because it's not you. Because there's another person you love that has a different way of looking at life, and you allow that into your life, not because you're trying to control them to become an extension of you, which of course undermines the whole purpose of what love is all about. Now that requires courage and requires trust, and requires, above all, not take yourself that seriously and your opinions about the finite world, about the infinite world. So, to sum it up in the words of the emotions and intellect, as I was saying before, we begin our lives very in an emotional state. Children are more emotional than they are minds. And emotional means subjective and limited, and your emotions will cause many fears, but your mind can take you to places your heart can never take you. And then, and this is the greatest statement of all, your heart can follow. That's the bottom line. If you allow your mind to wander to places like that, your heart can follow. And that's when you are able to transcend your boundaries. That's ultimately what an adult really is about. Not just chronological age, but you actually grow to a place where you can transcend your childish fears, your childish insecurities. You allow your mind to take you to a greater place, and then the rest of you will follow. And this requires, of course, finding people that you can trust and you can relate to, that accompany you on this journey, and how we each can help each other in this direction. So, in this month, the beginning of this month of El, some of you may be following the book 60 Days that I had the honor to compose. It's a book that is a part of the journey, step by step. And as you'll see in the beginning, it's about Lech Lecha, it's about leaving our past behind, basically saying that no matter what your yesterday was like, even though Paul McCartney sings about yesterday, whatever your yesterday was like, that you can leave it behind. And when you do, you can find refuge in a new future. And it is a process. That's why we have El day by day. It doesn't have to be cold turkey, because most of us cannot really change things anyway overnight. Step by step, drop by drop, you can pierce the stone, and you can reach a place that is ultimately transcendent. So I want to wish everyone a very pleasant journey through this El, a loving one. And please see me as a resource, a fellow sojourner, is the word? Sojourner, a fellow journeyman in this journey. And as I said, this journey for me is going to be in many different ways, both psychologically, emotionally, and also physically. So though I remain loyal to this synagogue, and I'll probably do plenty of programs here, but center of activity will be moving to the East Village, where I will begin Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur there. And I will announce here, before anyone else knows this, that the Saturday night of Slichot, we'll be doing Slichot there too, preceded by 9 o'clock around a musical evening, which you're all welcome to come to. You'll see more in the emails, and on the website there'll be like a whole nice little kumzis there, some bands playing and music. And stay tuned and fasten your seatbelts. Okay, so everyone have a very good night. And if you do want to participate and join us in the high holiday services that I will be leading in the 6th Street Synagogue, please either speak to Velvel, or you can go online to, we made a special website, NY as in New York, nyhighholidays.com, NY High Holidays. And I'd be honored to have you participate. We're doing meals there, the works. So there's going to be plenty of action coming. So everyone have a very, very good night.
Is this class going to
It's going to move there. It's going to move there. Yes, yes. Everything's going to move there.
We are a group of women here that are following